I watched through the lighthouse beam as a woman's body floated lifelessly toward the jagged rocks below, her expensive evening gown torn and bloodied from whatever hell she'd escaped. She had no idea that pulling her from those icy Atlantic waters would lead me into a world of international assassins, royal conspiracies, and a love story that would either save us both or get us killed. She also didn't know that the men hunting her had already found my lighthouse and were closing in fast. What happened next would be captured by Coast Guard surveillance and used to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of international power. Sometimes the person you think you're saving is actually the one who ends up saving you. And sometimes, when you're being hunted by killers, the only way out is to fight back with everything you've got. Quick, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've ever helped a complete stranger in a life-or-death situation. Now, if you've ever wondered what it would be like to discover someone's incredible secret identity, smash that subscribe button because this story is about finding love in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Hit that like button if you believe some risks are worth taking for the right person. Let's dive into how I saved a princess. My name is Thomas Gray, and 3 weeks ago I was just another lighthouse keeper fighting to keep my job while the Coast Guard threatened to automate my position out of existence. Today, I'm sitting in a safe house, watching news footage of international arrests that started with me pulling a drowning woman from the Atlantic Ocean. It started during the worst storm I'd seen in 12 years of manning the Beacon Point light station. September storms are usually manageable, but this one had been building for days, turning the normally calm waters into 30-foot walls of death. I was checking the lighthouse beam for the third time that night when something made every instinct I'd developed scream that someone was in trouble. Through the driving rain, I spotted what looked like debris floating toward the rocks that had claimed dozens of ships over the past century. Then I realized it wasn't debris. It was a person. A woman was floating face down in the surf, her body limp as a broken doll, being dragged toward the granite teeth that would tear her apart in seconds. Without thinking, I grabbed my rescue rope and dove into water so cold it felt like knives. The current was stronger than anything I'd fought before, but I reached her just as a massive wave was about to slam her against the rocks. She was maybe 25, with long dark hair plastered across her face and wearing what looked like the torn remains of an expensive evening gown. No jewelry, no identification, nothing to tell me who she was or how she'd ended up in the Atlantic during a killer storm. Getting her back to shore nearly killed us both. By the time I hauled her onto the rocky beach, my lungs were burning and my arms felt like lead. But she was breathing barely, but breathing. I carried her up the winding path to the lighthouse keeper's quarters, her head lolling against my shoulder. The apartment built into the base of the tower wasn't much, but it was warm and dry. I laid her on my couch and checked for injuries. A nasty gash on her forehead, probably from debris, but no obvious broken bones. I'd seen enough drowning victims to know hypothermia was the real killer. I got her out of the wet clothes, wrapped her in every blanket I owned, and built up the fire until the room felt like a furnace. Then I sat beside her and waited, listening to the storm rage outside and wondering if she'd live to see morning. She woke up 18 hours later, her eyes fluttering open to focus on my face with confusion and something that looked like pure terror. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke, but there was something elegant about her accent, cultured, like she'd been educated at the kind of schools that cost more than I made in a year. Where am I? I set down the medical supplies I'd been organizing and leaned forward. Beacon Point Light Station. I'm Thomas Gray, the lighthouse keeper. I pulled you from the water during the storm. She tried to sit up, winced, and settled back against the pillows. The storm. I remember the boat breaking apart. The water was so cold. What boat? I didn't see any wreckage wash ashore. A shadow crossed her face as she pressed her fingertips to her temples. I don't, it's fuzzy. Everything after the explosion is just fragments. Explosion? She touched the bandage on her forehead carefully. I think so. There was a flash, then the deck tilted, and people were screaming. Her voice broke with the memory. I don't remember anything else until I woke up here. What's your name? The pause that followed was so long I started to think she'd lost consciousness again. When she finally spoke, there was something careful about it. Elena. Elena what? She closed her eyes, as if trying to pull something from the depths of her memory. I'm not sure. My head hurts when I try to remember. Memory loss wasn't uncommon with head trauma, but something about her hesitation felt deliberate. Still, I didn't push. Survivors needed time to process trauma. Over the next few days, Elena slowly regained her strength. She helped around the lighthouse, learning to tend the beacon and check the weather instruments. She was surprisingly good at it, understanding complex systems with just a quick explanation. But her hands were soft, definitely not used to manual labor. And sometimes I'd catch her staring at the horizon with an expression I couldn't read, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. "You're running from something," I said one evening as we watched the sunset from the lighthouse gallery. She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke with a wistful tone that made my chest tighten. "Maybe I was meant for a simpler life. This feels peaceful. Like I've been running for a long time and finally found a place to rest." I was falling in love with her, and that terrified me. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was stunning, but because of the way she carried herself. Like she'd been trained from birth to handle attention, to speak carefully, to never fully reveal what she was thinking. 2 weeks after I'd found her, Elena was hanging laundry behind the lighthouse when she suddenly went rigid. I looked up from the engine I was repairing to see her staring at a sleek yacht approaching the harbor, something expensive flying colors I didn't recognize. "Elena? You okay?" She backed toward the lighthouse, her face pale as death. "I need to go inside." "What's wrong?" She pressed her hand to her temple, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "I don't know. Something about that boat. I'm getting flashes. Men in dark suits. Someone shouting my name, but not Elena. Something else." The yacht dropped anchor just outside the harbor, and I watched through binoculars as a speedboat launched toward shore. 3 men in expensive suits, moving with the purposeful efficiency of professionals. Something about them made my blood run cold. "Elena," I called, but she was already inside, pacing the living room like a caged animal. She whispered, her voice tight with panic, "They're not here by accident. I can feel it. They're looking for someone." "Looking for who?" She turned to me, her eyes wide with returning memory and absolute terror. "Me. They're looking for me, and if they find me, we're both dead." That's when she told me the truth that would change everything. Her real name was Princess Elena Vasquez of San Marcos, a small but wealthy island nation in the Caribbean. Her father, King Carlos, had been negotiating a trade agreement that would bring billions in tourism revenue while protecting their marine sanctuaries from exploitation. But certain powerful interests, shipping magnates, oil companies, resort developers, stood to lose fortunes if the deal went through. Elena's hands shook as the memories flooded back. I was on the royal yacht, sailing back from the signing ceremony in Miami. We were celebrating. My father was so proud he'd managed to protect our homeland while securing our economic future. What happened? Betrayal. Someone we trusted planted explosives. The blast killed my bodyguards instantly and sent me overboard. I remember clinging to debris, watching the yacht sink with everyone I cared about trapped inside. My blood ran cold. "Your father?" Tears streamed down her face as the full horror of her situation became clear. "I don't know. If he survived, if anyone survived, they would have searched for me. The fact that those men are here now means either my father is dead or they're not working for him." Through the window, I could see the speedboat had reached shore. The 3 men were talking to the dockmaster, showing him something, probably a photograph. "We need to get you out of here," I said. She shook her head helplessly. "Where?" "I have no money, no identification, no way to prove who I am. And if they're willing to blow up a royal yacht, they won't hesitate to kill a lighthouse keeper who got in their way." She was right. We were trapped on a rocky outcrop with nowhere to run and no way to call for help. The storm had knocked out our communications, and I'd been waiting for parts to fix the radio. But Elena had underestimated one thing. I'd spent 12 years on this coast, and I knew every cave, every hidden path, every smuggler's route that had been carved into these cliffs over 2 centuries. I know a place, I said. But we have to move now. I grabbed my emergency kit and led Elena down a narrow path invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. It wound along the cliff face to a sea cave that rum runners had used during Prohibition. The entrance was hidden at high tide, but the cave stayed dry and had fresh water from an underground spring. We'd barely made it inside when we heard voices echoing from the lighthouse above. The men had arrived, and they were thorough, checking every building and outbuilding with professional efficiency. Elena whispered, her breath visible in the cool cave air, "They'll find the path eventually." "Maybe. But by then, we'll be gone." I pointed deeper into the cave system. "These tunnels connect to the old smuggler's network. There's another entrance 2 miles up the coast, hidden in the pine woods. From there, we can reach the main road." "And then what?" "We can't run forever." She was right. But as I looked at her in the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, I realized I didn't want to run. I wanted to fight. "Then we don't run," I said. "We prove who you really are and expose whoever tried to kill you." Elena stared at me with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Thomas, these people have unlimited resources. They killed a yacht full of trained professionals. What makes you think we can?" "Because they made one mistake," I interrupted. "They assumed you were dead. That means they haven't been covering their tracks as carefully as they should have. Somewhere, there's evidence of who ordered the attack. It took us 6 hours to navigate the tunnel system to the hidden entrance in the pine woods." Elena had proven tougher than her royal upbringing might have suggested, never complaining as we crawled through narrow passages and waded through underground streams. We emerged at dawn, both filthy and exhausted but alive. The road was a 1/4 mile through dense forest, and from there we could hitchhike to the nearest town with internet access. "I know someone who might help," Elena said as we walked, her voice growing stronger with each step away from immediate danger. "My roommate from university. She's an investigative journalist now, works for the Washington Herald. If anyone can help us expose this conspiracy, it's Sarah Chen." It took 3 days to reach Sarah Chen, and another 2 for her to verify Elena's identity through encrypted channels with contacts in San Marcos. What she discovered made our situation even more dangerous than we'd thought. King Carlos was alive but in hiding, having barely escaped his own assassination attempt just hours after Elena's yacht exploded. The man behind both attacks was Marcus Delacroix, a French shipping magnate whose company stood to lose billions if San Marcos's environmental protections went into effect. But Delacroix had made a crucial error. In his rush to eliminate the royal family, he'd hired the same mercenary group for both hits. Sarah's investigation had uncovered financial records linking him directly to the explosives used on Elena's yacht. Sarah's voice came through our secure video call with professional excitement. "We have enough evidence to expose him. But Elena needs to testify in person. The International Court of Justice has agreed to hear the case, but only if they can verify she's really Princess Elena Vasquez." "How do we do that without getting killed?" I asked. Sarah replied with the confidence of someone who'd broken major stories before, very carefully. "I have a plan, but it's going to require both of you to trust me completely." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Elena would surface publicly at the Lighthouse Heritage Foundation's annual gala in Boston, a gathering of maritime historians, Coast Guard officials, and wealthy donors that would provide both witnesses and security. I would introduce her as a shipwreck survivor I'd rescued, letting her tell her own story to the assembled crowd. Sarah had already leaked word to selected journalists that a major story was breaking, ensuring media coverage that would make it impossible for Delacroix's people to silence Elena without creating an international incident. The night of the gala, I stood beside Elena in the grand ballroom of Boston's Copley Plaza Hotel, watching her transform back into the princess she'd been born to be. She wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had provided, but she carried herself with unmistakable royal poise. When the foundation president introduced us, Elena stepped to the microphone with calm dignity. "3 weeks ago, I was Princess Elena Vasquez of San Marcos," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. "Today, I stand before you as a survivor of an assassination attempt designed to silence my family forever. She told the whole story, the trade agreement, the yacht explosion, the men who'd hunted her to Beacon Point. She named Marcus Delacroix and detailed the evidence Sarah had uncovered. The room was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Thomas Gray didn't just pull me from the water, she said, looking directly at me with eyes that held all the love we'd discovered together. He showed me that true nobility isn't about titles or wealth. It's about the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. All I could see was Elena, radiant and strong, reclaiming her identity and her power. The international response was swift and decisive. Within hours, Delacroix was arrested by Interpol, and King Carlos emerged from hiding to reunite with his daughter. The trade agreement was signed within the week, and San Marcos began its transformation into a model of sustainable development. But the real transformation was personal. Elena asked me to come with her to San Marcos, not as a royal consort, but as the man she loved. She wanted to establish a marine rescue service for the Caribbean, and she needed someone who understood both the sea and the technology required to save lives. "I'm offering you a job," she said as we stood together on the dock where it all began, watching the Beacon Point light sweep across the water one last time. Director of Maritime Safety for the San Marcos Coast Guard. "The pay is terrible, the hours are worse, and you'll be working for a woman who's technically a princess." "What about the princess part?" I asked, pulling her closer. Elena smiled, the same smile that had first made me fall in love with her when she was just a nameless woman grateful to be alive. "The princess part is negotiable. But the woman who loves you? That's permanent." 6 months later, I stood on a beach in San Marcos, watching Elena cut the ribbon on our new Marine Rescue headquarters. She wore a simple white sundress and had sand between her toes, but she was still the most regal person I'd ever seen. That evening, as we walked along the shore where we'd built our new life together, Elena stopped and turned to face the lighthouse we'd constructed on the point, not just a navigation aid, but a symbol of hope for anyone lost at sea. "Do you ever miss the old lighthouse?" she asked. I looked at her, this incredible woman who'd washed up on my shore and changed everything, then at the light beginning to sweep across the water, guiding ships safely home. "No," I said, taking her hand. "Some lights are meant to be shared." A year later, we were married on that same beach in San Marcos, with representatives from dozens of nations in attendance. But the moment I'll never forget was when Elena's father, King Carlos, pulled me aside during the reception. "Thomas," he said, gripping my shoulder with genuine warmth, "you saved more than my daughter's life. You saved our entire kingdom. The environmental protections she helped secure will preserve our waters for generations." "I just did what anyone would do," I replied. The king smiled with the wisdom of someone who'd ruled for decades. "No, you did what a true hero does. You risked everything for someone else, with no guarantee of reward." As I watched Elena dance with local fishermen who'd become our friends, their children splashing in the surf nearby, I realized that some rescues change everyone involved. I'd pulled a drowning woman from the Atlantic, but she'd saved me from a life that was slowly drowning in loneliness and routine. The lighthouse I'd left behind in Maine was now automated, just as the Coast Guard had planned. But the light Elena and I had built together, our rescue service, our love, our commitment to protecting others, that would burn forever. Sometimes the most important rescues happen when you least expect them, and sometimes the person you think you're saving is actually the one who ends up saving you. So we've reached the end of today's story. Did you see the princess reveal coming, or were you surprised by Elena's true identity? I want to hear your thoughts. Would you have risked everything to help a stranger in danger? Drop your opinions in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. If this rescue romance kept you hooked from start to finish, smash that like button. And if you're new here, hit subscribe for more stories where ordinary people find extraordinary love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.